Dog carries abandoned little girl to police station. One detail made officers call 911 in tears. Before we dive into this story, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. This journey we're about to embark on together is one that will touch your heart in ways you never expected. It was an ordinary Monday morning in the small town of Millfield, Indiana, the kind of place where everybody knows everybody, and excitement usually means a new flavor at the local ice cream parlor. At the police station, Chief Richard Mason was sorting through paperwork for his upcoming retirement. After 30 years on the force, he'd seen it all, or so he thought. The station was quiet except for the occasional ring of a telephone and the steady hum of the ancient coffee maker in the corner. Officer Jennifer Parker was discussing weekend plans with the receptionist when the front door swung open. What walked in changed everything. A medium-sized dog covered in mud and burrs limped determinedly into the station, but what made every person in that room freeze wasn't the dog itself, it was what the dog carried. Balanced precariously on the animal's back was a small child, a little girl, no older than 5 or 6. Unconscious and dangerously thin, her clothes torn and dirty. "Good Lord," whispered Mason, rushing forward as the dog gently lowered itself to the ground, allowing the child to slide off its back onto the floor. The dog stood protectively over the girl, amber eyes, watching everyone with intelligent caution. When Officer Parker approached, the dog didn't growl, but positioned itself between her and the child. "Call an ambulance," Mason ordered, his gruff voice cracking slightly as he knelt beside the girl. Her small chest rose and fell with shallow breaths. Her arms bore scratches from tree branches, and her feet were bare and blistered. "She's alive," he announced, relief washing over the room. The child's eyes fluttered open for a brief moment, wide, frightened eyes that seemed to have seen too much. As the paramedics arrived, something unprecedented happened. Chief Mason, the man known throughout Millfield as Stone Face, felt a tear roll down his weathered cheek. In 3 decades, not one officer had ever seen him cry. "She looks," he whispered to Parker, unable to finish the sentence. "Like she was thrown away," Parker completed, the words hanging heavy in the air. The paramedics worked quickly, attaching an IV and oxygen. When they tried to separate the dog from the child, the animal whimpered but didn't resist, until they began wheeling the girl away. Then it barked once, firmly, and followed the stretcher as if it had every right to do so. "Where did she come from?" Mason asked, scanning the street through the window. "And how did this dog know to bring her here?" As the ambulance pulled away, Mason noticed something else. The dog was wearing a worn collar. There might be identification, a starting point for their investigation. Parker approached with a notepad. "What should we do, Chief?" Mason straightened his shoulders, determination replacing shock. "We find out who she is, we find out where she came from, and we find out why nobody's looking for her." Outside, the small town continued its quiet Monday routine, unaware that their community harbored a mystery that would challenge everything they thought they knew about their neighbors, their town, and themselves. The search for answers had begun. The emergency room at Millfield Community Hospital burst into activity as the paramedics wheeled in the small, frail girl. Dr. Sarah Connors, the head of pediatrics with 20 years of experience, took one look at the child and immediately called for additional assistance. "Severe dehydration, malnourishment, multiple contusions," she reported calmly, though her eyes betrayed her concern. "Let's get her stabilized." Outside the treatment room, Chief Mason stood with his hat in his hands, watching through the window as the medical team worked. The dog, whose mud-caked collar revealed the name Samson, sat beside him, equally vigilant, ears perked forward as if understanding the gravity of the situation. "You brought her to the right place, boy," Mason said, surprising himself by addressing the animal. Samson looked up at him with intelligent eyes that seemed to say, "I know." Officer Parker arrived with her laptop. "Chief, I've started searching missing persons reports. Nothing matching her description in our county or the surrounding ones. Expand the search statewide," Mason instructed. "Someone must be looking for her." That's just it, sir. Parker's voice lowered. I also ran a preliminary check in the national database while driving over. Nothing. No Amber Alerts, no reports matching her age or description. Not even close matches. Mason frowned. That's impossible. A child doesn't just not exist. There's more, Parker continued, her expression troubled. The hospital says she has no medical bracelet, no school ID, nothing to identify. The only thing they found was this. She held up a small evidence bag containing a homemade bracelet, crudely fashioned from colored string with wooden beads spelling out a name, Emily. Inside the treatment room, a nurse attempted to cut away the girl's tattered clothes. The child awoke. Suddenly, eyes wide with terror. She didn't scream. She made no sound at all. But her silent panic was more heartbreaking than any cry could have been. She tried to roll away, falling off the edge of the gurney before Dr. Connors could catch her. Sampson barked once sharply and scratched at the door. Mason, acting on instinct, opened it. The dog bounded straight to the girl who had wedged herself beneath a table. The medical staff stepped back, alarmed, but what happened next astonished everyone. The dog gently nosed the girl's arm, and she immediately clutched his fur. Her breathing slowed. The terror in her eyes subsided, though wariness remained. I've never seen anything like it, Dr. Connors whispered. An elderly nurse named Margaret Williams approached slowly and knelt at a respectful distance. Hello, sweetheart, she said softly. Is your name Emily? That's a beautiful name. The girl didn't respond verbally, but her eyes flickered with recognition at the name. Emily, Margaret continued, this is Dr. Connors. She needs to check that you're okay. Sampson can stay right here with you. Is that all right? After a long moment, Emily gave the slightest nod. Later, as Emily slept with Sampson curled protectively beside her hospital bed, Mason received disturbing news from the station. We've checked birth records, school enrollments, social services, everything, Parker reported. Chief, it's like this girl doesn't exist on paper. No birth certificate, no immunization. Records, nothing. Mason stared through the window at the sleeping child. Every child has a history, Parker. Someone brought her into this world. Someone gave her that name. And someone failed to protect her, Parker added quietly. Mason's jaw tightened as he watched Sampson shift position, placing himself between Emily and the door. Whoever they are, he said, they'd better hope we find them before I retire. Outside the hospital, darkness fell over Millfield as residents went about their evening routines, unaware that in their midst, a mystery was deepening, and a little girl who officially didn't exist was about to change everything. Morning light filtered through the hospital blinds as Margaret Williams began her shift. She'd volunteered to take all of Emily's care assignments, a request Dr. Connors had readily approved after seeing the girl's response to the elderly. Nurse, Margaret entered the room quietly, finding Emily awake but motionless, her large eyes following Margaret's every move. Sampson, who'd been allowed to stay despite hospital regulations, Chief Mason had been quite persuasive, thumped his tail in greeting but remained at Emily's side. Good. Morning, sunshine, Margaret said cheerfully. Are you hungry? Emily didn't respond, but her gaze drifted to the breakfast tray. Progress, Margaret thought. At the police station, Mason spread out the meager evidence they had collected. Sampson's collar had yielded their first real lead, a weathered dog license and rabies tag. Sampson, registered to Mildred Carter, 156 Oakwood Lane, he read aloud to Parker. Registration expired 6 months ago. I checked the property records, Parker replied. Mildred Carter passed away around that time. Natural causes according to the death certificate. Mason frowned. Any family? A daughter, Heather Carter. No other relatives listed. I'm still trying to locate her. Mason studied the map where Oakwood Lane was marked. A remote property at the edge of town, backing up to Millfield Forest. I want to see this place, he decided. And I want to know why a dog registered to a dead woman brought an unregistered child to our doorstep. Back at the hospital, Margaret had made a discovery. She'd brought colored pencils and paper, hoping to connect with Emily, and the strategy was working. The girl wouldn't speak, but she could draw. Her first picture showed a house with dark windows. Her second depicted a woman with wild hair. The third drawing made Margaret's heart ache, a small figure in what appeared to be a room with a tiny window near the ceiling. "Is this where you stayed, sweetheart?" Margaret asked gently. Emily didn't look up but started another drawing, this one of a dog carrying something on its back. "Samson carried you, didn't he? He's your hero." At this, Emily finally met Margaret's eyes and gave the faintest nod. Margaret noticed something else, faint indentations on Samson's back, like old scars, where his fur didn't grow quite right. She realized with a jolt what they might be from, carrying a child repeatedly over rough terrain. Mason and Parker drove slowly down the unpaved Oakwood Lane. The Carter property came into view, a two-story farmhouse set back from the road, partially hidden by overgrown trees. The mailbox listed precariously, stuffed with months of undelivered mail. "Doesn't look like anyone's been here in a while," Parker observed as they approached the house. Mason noticed something by the fence line, a small gap, just large enough for a medium-sized dog to squeeze through. "Maybe not through the front door," he replied. They circled the property cautiously. The backyard was wild with unchecked growth, but Mason spotted what looked like a rough path, not made by humans, but by an animal traveling the same route repeatedly. Inside, the house told a story of gradual decline. The kitchen was neat but dusty, with a calendar still showing May, the month Mildred Carter had passed away. A bedroom upstairs contained photographs, an elderly woman with kind eyes, presumably Mildred, and a younger woman with a distant expression. In the study, Parker found a drawer filled with prescription bottles. "Heather Carter," she read, "antipsychotic medications, all expired." Mason was examining a series of framed certificates when his phone rang. It was Margaret. "Chief, Emily's drawn something you need to see," she said without preamble. "A house with a room, the basement, and she's drawn Samson carrying her away from it." Mason looked out the window toward the overgrown backyard, where the path led into the trees. "Parker," he called, "we need to check if this house has a basement." As Parker searched for a basement entrance, Mason stepped outside, following the faint trail that wound from the back of the property toward the forest. He stopped at the tree line, struck by a realization that sent chills down his spine. "He didn't just bring her to us once," he murmured, looking at the well-worn path. "Samson had been trying to save her for a long time." Behind him, Parker's voice rang out from the house. "Chief, I found the basement door, and you're going to want to see this." The basement door stood ajar, its hinges protesting as Mason pushed it wider. The beam from his flashlight cut through the musty darkness, illuminating a narrow staircase descending into shadows. "Watch your step," he cautioned Parker as they made their way down. The basement was surprisingly clean compared to the rest of the house, as though someone had taken care to maintain this space specifically. Mason's flashlight beam revealed a small room within the larger space, separated by a makeshift wall. The door to this inner room had a sliding bolt on the outside. "Chief," Parker's voice was tight as she pointed to the floor near the door. A dog bowl, long empty, sat beside a plate with dried crumbs. Mason stepped into the smaller room. A thin mattress lay in the corner. The walls were covered with children's drawings, dozens of them chronicling a silent story. Some showed a happy scene, a young woman, an older woman, and a small child together. Others depicted the same figures, but with the older woman missing, and the younger one's hair becoming increasingly wild. The most recent drawings showed only a child and a dog. "He was feeding her," Mason said quietly, indicating the bowl. "Samson was bringing her food." Parker pointed to a small window near the ceiling, barely large enough for a child to look through, much less escape, but with broken glass at one corner. "That's how he got in," she realized. "Samson broke that window and jumped down to reach her." Mason's flashlight caught something else, tiny fingerprints on the wall beneath the window, as if someone had stood on tiptoes daily, looking out at the sky. Emily was kept here, Mason said, his voice barely controlled, and Samson was her only connection to the outside world. Back at the hospital, Margaret had made another breakthrough. She'd brought a children's picture book, and Emily had pointed to certain words, showing she could read at a basic level. "Someone taught you," Margaret said gently. "Was it the older lady in your drawings, your grandmother?" Emily didn't speak, but her fingers traced the outline of an elderly woman in one of her pictures, the same kind-eyed woman from the photographs in the Carter house. When Dr. Connors entered for his evening rounds, Emily immediately stiffened. Margaret noticed she seemed especially frightened of male doctors with authoritative voices. "It's all right, sweetheart," Margaret soothed. "Dr. Connors is here to help you feel better." After the doctor left, Margaret sat beside Emily's bed while Samson dozed on the floor. "You know," she said conversationally, "when I was a little girl, I was scared of thunderstorms. I used to hide under my bed whenever I heard thunder." Emily's eyes flickered with interest. "My grandmother taught me to count between the lightning and the thunder. The longer the count, the farther away the storm. It helped me feel safer knowing the storm was moving away." Margaret pulled out a new sheet of paper. "Would you like to draw something else for me?" To her surprise, Emily reached for the paper and carefully drew a small window with rain outside. Below, she drew a child counting on her fingers. Margaret's heart swelled. "That's right, sweetheart, you count until the scary things go away." At the Carter house, Mason and Parker had completed their initial investigation. They'd collected Emily's drawings, photographed the basement, and were preparing to leave when Mason's phone rang. It was the county records office returning his urgent query. "Chief Mason, we found something odd in the property records," the clerk said. Mildred Carter had been requesting home health care assistance for herself and her daughter Heather for years. All denied due to insufficient documentation of need. "What about the granddaughter?" Mason asked. "That's just it, sir. There's no record of a granddaughter, no birth certificate filed by Heather Carter in the last 10 years. As twilight descended on the Carter property, Mason stood in the overgrown yard looking back at the house. Something caught his eye, a movement at an upstairs window. There and gone so quickly he might have imagined it. Parker approached from the car. "Chief, everything okay?" Mason narrowed his eyes at the now still window. "Parker, I want a patrol car. Watching this property tonight." "You think someone might come back?" Mason thought of the fresh path worn in the yard, the recently used basement, and the flash of movement upstairs. "I don't think whoever was keeping Emily here ever left," he said quietly. "And I think they know we've found her." As they drove away, neither officer noticed the curtain in the upstairs window shift slightly, revealing a pale face watching their departure with hollow eyes. Officer Johnson had been parked outside the Carter property since nightfall, his patrol car positioned to observe both the house and the driveway. 4 hours into his shift, the radio crackled. "Johnson, anything to report?" Mason's voice came through, tension evident even through the static. "All quiet, Chief. No movement, no lights. Stay alert. I'll relieve you at dawn." Mason couldn't sleep. He sat at his kitchen table, spreading out copies of Emily's drawings and the photographs from the Carter house. Something wasn't adding up. His phone rang, Margaret Williams, despite the late hour. "Chief, I thought you should know. Emily had a nightmare. When I came in, she was hiding under the bed with Samson. I managed to coax her out with a flashlight." "A flashlight?" "Yes. She seems comforted by light. I think—" Margaret hesitated. "I think she spent a lot of time in darkness." Mason's gaze drifted to the drawing of the basement window, that tiny square of light in Emily's confined world. At first light, Mason relieved Johnson and approached the Carter house alone. The morning dew had settled on the overgrown lawn, but something caught his attention: fresh footprints, leading from the back door into the woods. He followed cautiously, his hand on his holstered weapon. The trail ended at a small clearing, where he found something unexpected: a child-sized chair placed facing a tree trunk. Pinned to the tree was a photograph of Emily. Mason radioed Parker immediately. Get a search team to the woods behind the Carter property and contact the hospital. Make sure Emily's secure. At the hospital, Margaret had introduced Emily to simple card games. The girl's face remained solemn, but her eyes followed the cards with intelligence. When Margaret deliberately made a mistake, Emily actually reached out to move the card to its correct position, her first voluntary interaction. Well done, Margaret praised, and was rewarded with the ghost of a smile. Dr. Connors arrived with news. Emily's blood tests show long-term nutritional deficiencies, but she's responding well to treatment. Physically, she should make a full recovery. And emotionally? Margaret asked quietly. The doctor's expression grew serious. That journey will be much longer. In the woods, the search team discovered more disturbing items, a collection of Emily's drawings strung between trees, creating a bizarre gallery. In the center, they found a child's shoe that matched the pair Emily had been wearing when Sampson brought her in. It's like a shrine, Parker said, her voice hushed. Mason studied the arrangement, a chill running through him. This isn't remembrance, he said grimly. This is obsession. Whoever created this is still watching Emily, still believes they own her. As he turned to leave, a twig snapped deeper in the forest. Mason spun around but caught only a glimpse of movement, someone retreating rapidly through the trees. We need to find Heather Carter, Mason declared. Now! At the hospital, Emily suddenly froze during her game with Margaret, her eyes fixed on the window. Margaret followed her gaze but saw nothing. Yet Emily's expression said everything. Whoever she feared was still out there, watching and waiting. The town of Millfield was buzzing with whispers. News of the mysterious little girl and her faithful dog had spread, though the details remained mercifully vague. As Mason entered the diner for his morning coffee, conversations hushed momentarily before resuming with increased intensity. Anything new on the Carter case? Asked Doris, the owner, as she filled his cup. Mason shook his head. Not for public consumption, Doris. That poor child, she murmured. Everyone's talking about the dog that saved her, like something out of a storybook. Sometimes real life is stranger than fiction, Mason replied, thinking of the shrine in the woods. At the station, Parker had assembled everything they knew about Heather Carter. She was diagnosed with schizophrenia at 19, Parker explained, pointing to medical records. Stabilized with medication for years. Her mother, Mildred, was her caretaker. What about after Mildred died? That's where the trail goes cold. Heather missed all her appointments. Prescriptions went unfilled. It's like she vanished, except for the evidence she was still at the house. Mason examined a photograph of Heather from her driver's license, a younger, healthier version of the woman in Mildred's photos. We need to understand what happened after Mildred's death. He pointed to a name in Mildred's records. This social worker, Ellen Grayson. She tried to help Mildred get support. Let's talk to her. At the hospital, Margaret had brought watercolors to Emily's room. The girl had been hesitant at first, but Sampson nudged her encouragingly with his nose and she began to paint. Instead of the dark colors she'd used for her drawings, Emily selected blues and yellows, creating a simple sky with birds. That's beautiful, Margaret praised. I bet those birds are flying somewhere wonderful. Emily looked up, then carefully painted a small house in the corner, with 3 figures outside. A child, a dog, and a woman with gray hair that resembled Margaret. Margaret's breath caught. Is that where you'd like to go, sweetheart? Emily nodded almost imperceptibly. When Dr. Connors entered for his rounds, he was accompanied by a woman in a business suit. This is Ms. Winters from Child Protective Services, he explained. She needs to evaluate Emily's situation. Emily immediately tensed, her paintbrush freezing mid-stroke. Sampson moved closer to her, sensing her distress. Hello, Emily, Ms. Winters said, her voice professionally warm. I'm here to help find you a safe place to stay. The woman approached with a folder of forms, explaining to Margaret, we'll need to place her in emergency foster care while we investigate. Separate her from Sampson? Margaret asked, alarmed. That would be traumatic for her. Hospital policy already prohibits animals, Ms. Winters replied. Exceptions can't continue indefinitely. Emily's paintbrush clattered to the floor. Her eyes widened in panic, and she clutched Sampson's fur. At the Community Services Building, Mason and Parker sat across from Ellen Grayson, a tired-looking social worker with kind eyes. Mildred Carter, she sighed, pulling a thick file. One of my greatest regrets. She begged for help for years. What kind of help? Mason asked. Home health assistance mainly. She was getting older, had heart problems. Worried about caring for Heather. Ellen flipped through the file. The system failed them. Mildred didn't qualify for enough support, and after her death, Heather fell through the cracks completely. Did you know about a child? Emily? Ellen looked genuinely shocked. A child? No, there was never any mention of a child. As they left, Parker asked, why would Mildred hide her own granddaughter? Mason's face was grim. She must have been protecting Emily from something or someone. Back at the hospital, Margaret sat with Emily after Ms. Winters left. The girl had retreated into herself again, her brief progress seemingly undone by the threat of separation from Sampson. Listen to me, Emily, Margaret whispered, leaning close. I won't let them separate you two, I promise. She didn't know how she would keep that promise, but seeing Emily's trust in her, that same trust she had given to Sampson, Margaret knew she had to try. As daylight faded, Mason sat in his car, outside the Carter house, watching. The property remained still, yet he couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching back. Someone desperate enough to keep a child hidden from the world, and perhaps desperate enough to take her back. Rain tapped gently against the hospital windows as Margaret entered Emily's room with breakfast. The past few days had established a routine. Margaret would arrive early, before her official shift, to spend extra time with Emily. Today, however, she found an unexpected visitor. Chief Mason sat awkwardly in the visitor's chair, his large frame making the plastic seat look comically small. On his lap was a children's book, and he was reading aloud in a surprisingly gentle voice while Emily listened, Sampson at her feet. And the little rabbit found his way home, Mason finished, then looked up, slightly embarrassed to be caught in this softer moment. Chief Mason? Margaret smiled. I didn't know you made morning visits. Just dropped by to check on our witness, he said gruffly, but his eyes told a different story. The little girl who officially didn't exist had somehow worked her way into the tough police chief's heart. Mason stood, placing the book on the bedside table. My daughter loved this story when she was little, he explained. Thought Emily might too. As he prepared to leave, Mason paused at the door. Ms. Winters is submitting her placement recommendation today. Standard procedure would send Emily to emergency. Foster care. Margaret's face fell. And Sampson? Animal shelter, most likely. At this, Emily's eyes widened in alarm. Though she never spoke, her expressions had become more animated as she felt safer. Unless, Mason continued, watching Emily carefully, someone qualified applied for temporary guardianship. Someone with a safe home, clean record, and healthcare experience. Margaret met his gaze, understanding dawning. Someone like a registered nurse with 40 years' experience and a house with a fenced yard? Mason nodded, the hint of a smile on his weathered face. The paperwork might already be on your chair at the nurse's station. After Mason left, Margaret turned to Emily. How would you feel about staying with me and Sampson for a while? Just until we figure things out? Emily's response was subtle but clear. She reached for Margaret's hand and held it, her first voluntary touch. At the station, Parker had been digging deeper into Mildred Carter's past. Chief, I found something interesting, she said as Mason arrived. Before moving to Millfield, Mildred lived in Carson City, where Heather was hospitalized twice for psychiatric episodes. The first time was during her senior year of high school. The second, Parker paused significantly, was about 6 years ago. Around when Emily would have been born, Mason realized. Parker nodded. Here's where it gets interesting. I contacted the hospital in Carson City. Heather was admitted for postpartum psychosis, but there's no record of her delivering a baby anywhere in the state. Home birth? Possibly, but why keep it off the books? No birth certificate, no social security number. Mason rubbed his chin thoughtfully. Mildred was hiding Emily. The question is, from what? Or whom? That afternoon, Margaret, noon, filed for temporary guardianship of Emily, using the paperwork Mason had arranged. Dr. Connors supported her application with medical documentation stating that separating Emily from both Sampson and Margaret would be detrimental to her recovery. As Margaret completed the forms, she noticed Emily, watching her intently. "Do you know what I'm doing?" Margaret asked gently. Emily nodded, then did something unexpected. She slid from her bed, went to her small collection of drawings, and selected one. It showed a house with a woman, a child, and a dog standing outside. The same image she'd painted the day before. "That's right," Margaret said, tears threatening. "I'm trying to make that happen." Later, Mason and Parker returned to the Carter property with a search warrant for any documents related to Emily or Heather. In Mildred's bedroom, hidden in a hollowed-out family Bible, they discovered a journal. "Listen to this," Parker said, reading from the weathered pages. "Is condition worsening since baby arrived? Medication helps, but she won't take it consistently. Afraid they'll take the child if authorities learn of her condition. Cannot let that happen to my granddaughter." Mason looked grim. Mildred was protecting both of them, Heather from being institutionalized, Emily from being taken away. But by keeping Emily off the grid, she made her invisible. Parker noted. No school, no doctor visits, no one to notice if something went wrong. Which it did after. Mildred died, Mason concluded. As they prepared to leave, Mason's radio crackled. "Chief, Johnson here. You asked us to monitor activity in the woods behind the Carter property. We've got something. Fresh footprints leading to that shrine area. And they're not ours. Someone's been there within the last hour." Mason and Parker exchanged alarmed looks. "Keep the area under surveillance," Mason ordered. "But do not approach. Repeat, do not approach. This person is likely unstable and possibly dangerous." Back at the hospital, Emily had fallen asleep clutching her drawing of the house with Margaret. Sampson lay vigilant at the foot of her bed. Outside the window, barely visible through the rain, a figure stood watching from across the street. A woman with long, tangled hair, her thin frame nearly lost in the shadows. The morning sky was clearing as Margaret pulled into the hospital. Parking lot. Today was a significant day. Emily's medical discharge was scheduled, and if Margaret's guardianship application was approved, she would be taking the child and Sampson home. Her heart raced with equal parts excitement and anxiety. In the hospital room, Emily was already awake, sitting cross-legged on her bed with Sampson beside her. Over the past week, subtle changes had appeared. Her cheeks had more color, her eyes more alertness. Dr. Connors had declared her physically recovered, though her silence remained. "Good morning, sunshine," Margaret greeted warmly. "Today might be a big day for us." Emily's response was to hold up a drawing she'd been working on, a bedroom with flowers on the walls and a dog bed in the corner. Margaret smiled. "That looks just like the guest room at my house. I've been fixing it up hoping you might like it." At the police station, Mason and Parker were carefully reviewing Mildred's journal, which had become their most valuable window into Emily's mysterious past. "April 4th, Parker read aloud. "H thinks people are watching her through the windows. Covered them with blankets. Emily cried because she couldn't see the birds. When H wasn't looking, I cut a small hole in the blanket in E's room so she could still watch the sky." Mason nodded grimly. Mildred was trying to maintain some normalcy for Emily, while managing Heather's declining mental state. Parker turned another page. "May 10th. My heart acting up again. Doctor. Says I need surgery, but who would care for them if something happened? H cannot manage her medications, let alone a child. Trying to teach Sampson more helping tasks. Smart dog." She was preparing, Mason realized. Mildred knew she might not be around much longer, so she was training Samson to help. To help, yes, Parker said slowly. But could she have imagined he would eventually rescue Emily? The office phone rang, interrupting their discussion. Mason answered, his expression turning serious as he listened. "We'll be right there," he said, hanging up. "Johnson found something at the Carter property. A trapdoor in the floor of the shed, hidden under an old rug. When they arrived at the property, Officer Johnson led them to the weathered garden shed behind the house. I was searching for additional evidence when I noticed the floorboards didn't match," he explained, pulling back. A tattered rug to reveal a small door with a rusted handle. Mason pulled it open, revealing a space barely large enough for a person to fit, and inside, a metal box. The box contained more of Mildred's writings, but these weren't in a journal. They were letters, dozens of them, addressed to social services, police departments, and mental health facilities, all pleading for help with Heather. "She sent these?" Parker asked, noting the postmarks. "Some," Mason said, examining the envelopes, "but many were never mailed. Listen to this one. I fear what will happen to my granddaughter if my health fails. Heather's delusions are worsening. She believes Emily is somehow not real or will be taken by the others, as she calls them. I've installed additional locks, but I worry they're as much to keep Heather in as to keep dangers out." At the hospital, Margaret received the call she'd been hoping for. Her temporary guardianship application had been expedited and approved, thanks in part to Chief Mason's influence. She could take Emily home today. As Margaret helped Emily gather her few belongings, a nurse entered with a small paper bag. "This was with her clothes when she was admitted," she explained. "I almost forgot about it." Inside was a tarnished locket. When Margaret carefully opened it, she found a tiny photograph of Mildred, Heather, and a baby Emily, all smiling, a moment of happiness frozen in time. "Look, sweetheart," Margaret said gently, showing Emily. "Your family." Emily took the locket, her fingers tracing the faces. For a moment her expression brightened, but then clouds seemed to pass over her features as she looked at her mother's face. As Margaret drove home with Emily and Samson, she couldn't shake the feeling they were being watched. A stoplight. She glanced in her rearview mirror and caught a glimpse of a battered blue car several vehicles back. When the light changed, the car fell back, disappearing from view. Margaret tried to dismiss her unease as she pulled into her driveway, focusing instead on Emily's wide-eyed exploration of her new temporary home. "Welcome home, Emily," she said, opening the door to the flower-decorated bedroom she had prepared. Emily stepped inside carefully, Samson at her heels. She touched the bed, the curtains, the small bookshelf stocked with children's books. Then she looked up at Margaret with a question in her eyes. "Yes, sweetheart," Margaret assured her, understanding the unspoken query. "You can stay as long as you need to. You're safe now." Yet, even as she said it, Margaret couldn't help glancing out the window, where the afternoon shadows had begun to lengthen across her usually peaceful front yard. Emily's first night in Margaret's home passed peacefully, a stark contrast to the hospital stays with their constant interruptions and clinical lighting. Margaret had prepared a nightlight for Emily's room, along with a baby monitor just in case. But when Margaret checked in the early morning hours, she found a surprising scene. Emily's bed was empty. For a panicked moment, Margaret feared the worst until she heard Samson's gentle snoring. Following the sound, she found Emily curled up on the floor of the closet with Samson, both fast asleep on a nest of blankets she had pulled down. "Oh, sweetheart," Margaret whispered, understanding dawning. After spending so much time confined, Emily found comfort in smaller spaces where she could see everything around her. Later that morning, Chief Mason arrived with a stuffed animal tucked awkwardly under his arm. "Just a welcome gift," he mumbled when Margaret raised an eyebrow. It was a plush dog that resembled Samson. Emily accepted it with solemn gravity, placing it carefully next to the real Samson, who sniffed it curiously. "Any developments?" Margaret asked quietly while Emily arranged her few possessions in her new room. Mason nodded grimly. We've been piecing together the timeline from Mildred's journals and letters. After she died, Heather's condition deteriorated rapidly. The medications stopped, and her delusions about Emily intensified. What kind of delusions? She became convinced that Emily wasn't safe from the others. Whoever she imagined was threatening them. Based on the evidence in the basement, she thought she was protecting Emily by... Mason trailed off, glancing toward the bedroom where Emily was arranging her drawings on the wall. By keeping her confined, Margaret finished softly. We're still searching for Heather. Patrol cars reported possible sightings near the hospital yesterday, but nothing concrete. As Mason prepared to leave, Emily emerged from her room. She approached him hesitantly, then handed him one of her drawings. A police car with a stick figure that was clearly meant to be him. Mason knelt down to her level, his usual gruffness melting away. Thank you, Emily. This is going right up on my wall at the station. That afternoon, Margaret took Emily into the backyard for the first time. The child stepped onto the grass. With visible trepidation, as if expecting it might not be allowed. Samson bounded ahead, clearly delighted by the open space. Go on, Margaret encouraged. It's all yours to explore. Slowly, Emily ventured further, touching flowers, feeling the rough bark of trees, looking up at the open sky with wonder. Margaret realized with a pang that such simple pleasures might be entirely new experiences for her. Their peaceful moment was interrupted by the ringing of the doorbell. Margaret frowned. She wasn't expecting anyone. Wait here with Samson, she told Emily, heading inside to answer. On her porch stood a thin woman with haunted eyes and nervous hands. I'm looking for my daughter, she said, her voice hoarse from disuse. I was told she might be here. Margaret's blood ran cold as she recognized the woman from the photographs. Heather Carter, Emily's mother. Ms. Carter, Margaret said carefully, blocking the doorway. How did you find this address? Heather's eyes darted around frantically. I followed you from the hospital. They took her there, but she doesn't belong there. She belongs with me, where I can protect her. Emily is safe, Margaret said firmly. She's receiving proper care. They'll take her, Heather interrupted, her voice rising. The others always take children who aren't protected. Her gaze fixed on something behind Margaret. Emily? Margaret turned to find Emily standing in the hallway, Samson protectively at her side. The child's face had gone completely white at the sight of her mother. Emily, baby, come to mommy, Heather said, her tone shifting from frantic to sickly sweet. I've been looking everywhere for you. Our house isn't safe anymore. We need to find a new hiding place. Emily backed away slowly, her hand clutching Samson's fur. Margaret reached for her phone. Ms. Carter, I'm going to call someone who can help you. Heather's expression darkened. You're one of them, aren't you? One of the ones trying to take her. She lunged forward suddenly, trying to push past Margaret into the house. Samson barked sharply, positioning himself between Emily and the doorway. The commotion attracted the attention of Margaret's neighbor, who called out from his yard, Everything okay over there, Maggie? The interruption gave Margaret the moment she needed. No, Jim! Call the police, please! Heather backed away, her face contorting with fear and anger. I'll be back for her, she warned before turning and fleeing down the street. Margaret quickly locked the door and rushed to Emily, who stood frozen in place, trembling slightly. It's okay, Margaret soothed, kneeling beside her. You're safe. I promise. You're safe. But the shadow that had crossed Emily's face told a different story. The past had found them, and the fragile peace they had built was now threatened. The police arrived within minutes of Margaret's neighbor's call. Officer Parker took detailed notes while a shaken Margaret recounted Heather's sudden appearance. She seemed desperate, Margaret explained. Convinced someone was trying to take Emily away. That matches what we've learned about her delusions, Parker replied. Chief Mason has ordered patrols in your neighborhood, and we've put out an alert for Heather, not as a criminal, but as someone in need of psychiatric assistance. Emily sat silently in the living room, her hand buried in Samson's fur. her eyes fixed on the window as if expecting her mother to reappear. That night, Margaret set up a makeshift bed in Emily's room. "I thought I'd sleep in here." "Tonight," she said casually, "like a slumber party." Emily's relief was palpable. She climbed into bed, clutching both Samson's stuffed twin and a picture book Mason had brought. For the first time, she patted the edge of the bed, inviting Margaret to sit closer as she opened the book. Margaret read, until Emily's eyelids grew heavy. Just as the child was drifting off, something extraordinary happened. Emily spoke. "Safe?" she whispered, the word so faint Margaret almost missed it. Tears sprang to Margaret's eyes. "Yes, sweetheart, you're safe here." The next morning, Chief Mason arrived with news. "We found Heather's hideout, an abandoned hunting cabin about a mile from the Carter house. She's been living there since we started investigating the main property." "Did you find her?" Margaret asked, mindful of Emily playing nearby with Samson. Mason shook his head. "No, but we found evidence she's been watching Emily for days. Photographs taken from outside the hospital. Notes about routines. She's been planning this." Emily approached, holding up a drawing of a butterfly emerging from a cocoon, seemingly oblivious to their conversation. "That's beautiful," Mason said, his gruff voice softening. "Is that for Margaret's refrigerator?" Emily shook her head and handed it to him. "For me?" Mason asked, surprised. "Thank you, Emily." As he carefully took the drawing, Emily did something that stunned them both. She reached out and briefly touched Mason's hand, a gesture of trust that spoke volumes. Later, as Margaret prepared lunch, she gazed out the window at Emily in the backyard. The girl was walking slowly around the perimeter, Samson at her side, as if mapping her new boundaries. A glimpse of movement across the street caught Margaret's attention. A shadow. Behind a tree. There and gone so quickly she couldn't be certain she'd seen it. The doorbell rang, startling her. Dr. Connors stood on the porch with a folder. "I've been reviewing Emily's case," he explained as Margaret invited him in. "Her progress with you has been remarkable. She's responding to security and consistency, exactly what she needs." Through the window they watched as Emily discovered a dandelion gone to seed. She picked it carefully and blew, her face lighting up as the seeds floated away on the breeze. "That right there," Dr. Connors said quietly, "is a child breaking free. From her past, one small moment at a time. But outside the peaceful yard, beyond the fence that marked Emily's new safe haven, the shadows moved again, watching, waiting, planning. The search for Heather Carter intensified. Chief Mason organized volunteers into search teams, focusing on the wooded areas surrounding the Carter property. The abandoned hunting cabin had yielded disturbing insights. Walls covered with rambling writings and a makeshift shrine with Emily's photos. "She believes she's protecting Emily from imaginary threats," Mason explained to Margaret during his daily check-in. "The writing suggests she thinks Emily was replaced by an imposter. A common delusion in her condition," Dr. Connors had added. "Without medication, the line between reality and fantasy has disappeared for her." At Margaret's home, Emily was slowly blossoming. She still spoke rarely, single. Words, whispered like secrets. But her actions showed healing. She helped Margaret water plants, carefully arranged her books by color, and had begun sleeping in her bed instead of the closet. One morning, as Margaret prepared breakfast, Emily appeared in the kitchen doorway, Samson at her side as always. "Good morning, sunshine," Margaret smiled. "Pancakes today?" Emily nodded, then did something unexpected. She walked to the refrigerator where Margaret had posted a calendar and pointed to the current date. "Yes, it's Wednesday," Margaret confirmed. "Is Wednesday special?" Emily shook her head, then pointed to herself, to Samson, and finally to the front door. "You want to go somewhere?" Margaret guessed. Emily nodded emphatically, then tugged Margaret to the window that faced the distant woods. Margaret felt a chill. "You want to go to the woods?" Another nod, more insistent this. "Enheim." "Sweetheart, I don't think that's a good idea right now," Margaret began gently. Emily ran to her room, returning with a drawing, A crude map showing a house, trees, and a path leading to what looked like another small structure. Is this where you lived? With your mother and grandmother? Emily pointed to the smaller structure deep in the trees, then to Samson. Margaret suddenly understood. Samson had a special place? A place he took you? Emily's eyes lit up at being understood. She made a eating motion, then pointed to Samson and the structure on the map. He brought you food? Margaret whispered, the pieces falling into place. From this place in the woods. As they studied the child's drawing together, neither noticed the figure watching from the edge of the backyard, partially hidden behind an oak tree. A gaunt woman with wild eyes clutching a dirty teddy bear to her. Why? Chest. Margaret immediately called Chief Mason about Emily's drawing. Within an hour, he arrived with Officer Parker and a search specialist. Emily, this is Officer Roberts, Mason introduced gently. He helps find people using maps just like yours. Roberts knelt to Emily's level. This is, excellent work, he said, studying her drawing. Can you show me which way is north? Emily looked uncertain, then pointed to Samson, who sat alert by the back door. I think she's saying Samson knows the way, Margaret interpreted. Mason nodded thoughtfully. Dogs have incredible internal compasses. Samson navigated from the Carter property to the police station with Emily. He certainly knows these woods. The decision was made. A small search team would follow Emily's map, with Samson as an unlikely guide. For safety, Emily would remain with Margaret at home, with a patrol car stationed outside. We'll find this place, Mason promised Emily before leaving, and we'll make sure your mother gets the help she needs. After they departed, Emily seemed restless. She moved from window to window, checking outside as if expecting someone. Samson mirrored her anxiety, his ears perking at the slightest sound. How about we bake cookies? Margaret suggested, trying to distract her. Chocolate chip was my daughter's favorite when she was your age. Emily nodded absently, but her eyes kept drifting to the windows. Margaret gently guided her to the kitchen, where measuring cups and ingredients waited on the counter. In the forest, Mason's team followed Samson, who trotted purposefully along barely visible trails. The dog occasionally stopped, looking back as if checking that they were still following. He's done this route many times, Parker observed. Look how confident he is. After 20 minutes, they reached a small clearing containing a dilapidated shed. Samson sat expectantly, looking from the shed to Mason. This must be it, Mason said, approaching cautiously. The shed's interior told a heartbreaking story. Makeshift shelves stocked with canned goods now covered in dust. A child-sized blanket folded neatly in the corner, and a collection of simple toys fashioned from twigs and leaves. This was Samson's supply depot, Parker realized. He'd bring food from here to Emily when she was confined. Mason examined a dusty container. Dog food, mixed with human food. Mildred must have trained him to come here knowing her health was failing. She created a backup plan for Emily. While the officers documented the scene, Roberts noticed something odd about the shed's back wall. A false panel concealing a narrow space behind. Inside was a weathered leather journal. Chief, he called, I think you need to see this. Back at Margaret's house, the cookie baking session had lightened Emily's mood. She carefully placed chocolate chips in precise patterns, her face serious with concentration. As Margaret slid the cookie sheet into the oven, the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, she saw a delivery person with a package. Just a minute, she called, setting the oven timer. Emily, stay in the kitchen, okay? When Margaret opened the door, the delivery person pushed inside. Heather Carter, wearing a stolen uniform cap, her eyes wild with desperation. Where is she? Heather demanded, her voice ragged. Where's my real daughter? Margaret tried to block the hallway. Heather, please. Emily is safe here. Let us help you too. You don't understand, Heather insisted, clutching a ragged teddy bear. This is my Emily. That girl you have isn't mine. The others switched them, but I know the truth. A small noise from the kitchen doorway drew their attention. Emily stood frozen, her face pale with fear, flour-covered hands trembling. "There's the imposter," Heather hissed. "She looks like my Emily, but she's not. My real Emily is here." She held up the teddy bear, cradling it like an infant. Margaret stepped protectively toward Emily. "Heather, you're sick. You need medication, doctors." "I need my daughter," Heather cried, lunging forward. Samson appeared from nowhere, placing himself between Emily and her. Mother not growling but standing firm. "Traitor," Heather spat at the dog. "You were supposed to protect her, not give her to them." In that moment of confrontation, the kitchen timer buzzed loudly. The sudden noise seemed to disorient Heather, giving Margaret the opportunity to press the emergency button on her phone that Mason had provided. Outside, sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. The police arrived within minutes. Heather, seeing the patrol cars outside, backed against the wall, clutching her teddy bear Emily protectively. "They're coming to take her away," she whispered, terror in her eyes. "Don't let them take my baby." Chief Mason entered first, hands visible, voice calm. "Heather, I'm Richard Mason. We've been looking for you." "Stay back," Heather warned. "You're one of them, the ones who take children." Mason shook his head slowly. "I'm here to help, not harm. Your mother Mildred tried to get help for years. She wanted both you and Emily to be safe." At the mention of her mother, Heather's expression flickered. "Mom knew about the dangers. She helped me protect Emily." "Yes, she did," Mason agreed, taking a careful step forward. "And now we want to continue that protection, for both Emily and you." From the kitchen doorway, Emily watched the scene unfold, her small hand clutching Margaret's. For the first time, she was seeing her mother clearly, not as a looming shadow or distant threat, but as someone broken, confused, and afraid. Dr. Connors, arrived shortly after the police, having been called by Mason. He approached Heather with gentle professionalism. "Ms. Carter, I'm Dr. Connors. I've been helping Emily recover. She's doing well, but I think you need some care too." Heather's eyes darted between the Dr. Mason and finally Emily. A moment of lucidity seemed to break through her delusions. "Emily?" she whispered, her gaze fixing on her daughter rather than the teddy bear. "My real Emily?" Emily, in a display of courage that took everyone by surprise, stepped forward slightly. She didn't speak, but her eyes met her mother's. With a mixture of fear and something else, a child's instinctive love for a parent, complicated by trauma but not entirely erased. "You're so big now," Heather murmured, tears forming. "I was trying to keep you safe." "I know," Dr. Connors said gently. "You wanted to protect her, but now you both need different kinds of protection. Will you let us help you the way you tried to help Emily?" A tense moment passed as Heather looked from the teddy bear in her arms to her real daughter. Something shifted in her expression, confusion giving way to a flash of clarity. "I'm sick, aren't I?" she asked, her voice suddenly smaller. "Yes," Dr. Connors confirmed kindly, "but illness can be treated." Heather nodded slowly, tears streaming down her hollow cheeks. She allowed the paramedics to guide her to a stretcher, still clutching her teddy bear. As they wheeled her out, she called back, weakly, "Emily, will you be okay without me?" Emily, in a moment that brought tears to Margaret's eyes, nodded once, a simple gesture carrying complex emotions that even adults struggled to navigate. Later that evening, after the commotion had settled, Margaret found Emily sitting quietly in her bedroom. Instead of drawing, she was looking through the small photo album Mason had recovered from the Carter house, pictures of happier times with Mildred, with a healthier Heather, before illness had stolen so much from their family. "Your mother is going to a special hospital," Margaret explained. Gently. "They'll help her mind get better, the way the doctors helped your body get better." Emily looked up, her expression thoughtful. She pointed to a photo of Heather holding baby Emily, then to her heart, and made a cracking motion with her hands. "Yes," Margaret whispered, understanding. "Perfectly. Her heart is broken. Sometimes when hearts break, minds get confused too." Emily nodded, seeming to comprehend more than her years would suggest. She carefully closed the album and leaned against Margaret, exhausted by the day's events. As Emily drifted toward sleep, Margaret heard her whisper something that sounded like both sad. Whether she meant herself and Heather, or Heather and the teddy bear, Margaret couldn't be sure. But the empathy in those simple words showed a wisdom beyond Emily's years. The county courthouse was imposing even on ordinary days, but today it seemed especially formidable. 2 weeks had passed since Heather's intervention and subsequent hospitalization. Now, a family court hearing would determine Emily's future. Margaret sat nervously in the waiting area, dressed in her best navy blue suit, a small folder of documents clutched in her hands. Emily sat beside her, wearing a new yellow dress, her hair neatly brushed. Sampson lay at her feet, specially permitted to attend after Dr. Connors had submitted documentation about his therapeutic importance to Emily's well-being. "Remember what we talked about?" Margaret asked gently. "The judge just wants to make sure you're in the right place while your mother gets better." Emily nodded solemnly. In recent days, she had begun speaking more. Simple phrases, quiet questions, each word a small victory. Chief Mason arrived, surprisingly dapper in a suit rarely worn. "Ladies," he greeted them. With a formal nod that made Emily smile slightly, he knelt to eye level with the child. "The judge is very nice, Emily. Just like in the books we read about courtrooms, remember?" Emily nodded again, her hand finding Sampson's fur, her anchor in moments of uncertainty. Inside the courtroom, Judge Eleanor Winters presided with gentle authority. The proceedings began with formal statements, representatives from Child Protective Services outlining Emily's unusual case, Dr. Connors describing her progress, a psychiatric evaluation of Heather indicating her response to medication and therapy. When Margaret's turn came, she spoke from the heart. "Your Honor, in my 40 years as a nurse, I've seen countless children facing difficult circumstances. Emily's resilience inspires me daily. She's beginning to speak again. She's sleeping through the night most times, and she's learning to trust. Consistency and stability are crucial for her continued healing." The CPS representative, Ms. Reynolds, raised concerns. "While we acknowledge the bond that is formed, standard procedure recommends placement with relatives when possible, or with a foster family experienced in trauma cases." "Does Emily have any relatives besides her mother?" the judge inquired. "None that we've been able to locate," Ms. Reynolds admitted. Judge Winters turned to Emily, her tone softening. "Emily, would you like to say anything? You don't have to speak if you don't want to." The courtroom fell silent. Emily looked at Margaret, then at Mason, and finally at the judge. In a voice small but clear, she said, "I want to stay with Margaret and Sampson." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Many present knew this was the most Emily had spoken in public. The judge smiled warmly. "Thank you, Emily. That's very helpful." The proceedings continued with unexpected testimony from Chief Mason. "Your Honor, I've been in law enforcement for 30 years. I've seen what happens when children fall through the cracks of our system." His voice grew passionate. Margaret Williams didn't just offer Emily a place to stay. She offered understanding that can't be found in a manual or training course. She recognized that Sampson wasn't just a pet, but a lifeline for a child who had lost everything else. Mason paused, seeming almost embarrassed by his emotional delivery, before continuing more steadily. "The system failed Emily once. Let's not fail her again by prioritizing procedure over what's clearly best for her." Judge Winters considered thoughtfully. "What about Emily's mother? What is her position on this arrangement?" Dr. Connors stood. "Ms. Carter is making progress, but her recovery will take time. During our sessions, she's expressed that she wants Emily to be safe and happy while she focuses on her treatment. She's aware of Emily's attachment to Margaret and Sampson." The judge called a brief recess to review all information. As they waited, Emily suddenly took Margaret's hand and Mason's, too, holding them together like completing a circuit of safety around her. When Judge Winters returned, her decision was clear. "Given the extraordinary circumstances of this case and the documented progress Emily has made, I'm granting Margaret Williams temporary guardianship for a period of 6 months with regular evaluations and the possibility of extension. Ms. Carter will have supervised visitation as her treatment progresses. She looked directly at Emily. Young lady, it seems you've had quite a journey, but from what I've seen today, you found people who care deeply about you, including a very special dog. As they left the courthouse, autumn sunlight bathed them in gold. Emily walked between Margaret and Mason, Sampson trotting proudly ahead as if he understood his role had been officially recognized. "Home?" Emily asked, looking up at Margaret with hope in her eyes. "Yes, sweetheart," Margaret answered, her heart full. "We're going home." Behind them, the imposing courthouse seemed less intimidating now, a place where sometimes wisdom prevailed over procedure and healing was given room to grow. 6 months had passed since the courthouse decision. Autumn had given way to winter, winter to spring, and now summer bloomed across Millfield. In Margaret's backyard, a small graduation ceremony was taking place. Emily had completed her first year of homeschooling and would enter regular school in the fall. Chief Mason, now officially retired, stood proudly, with a small wrapped gift. Dr. Connors attended too, along with Officer Parker and a few hospital staff who had been part of Emily's journey. Even Ms. Reynolds from CPS was there, having become an unexpected ally after seeing Emily's progress. The guest of honor arrived in the garden wearing a IE sundress and a shy smile. Sampson trotted beside her, sporting a bow tie for the occasion. At 7 years old, Emily still carried the quietness of her past, but her eyes now held something they once lacked: hope. "Speech from the graduate," called Mason with uncharacteristic playfulness. Emily blushed but stepped forward. In the past months, her words had grown from whispers to sentences, each one a victory. "Thank you for coming," she said clearly, "and thank you for helping me." Simple words, but from a child who had once been silent, they carried immense weight. After cake and presents, Emily approached Margaret with a carefully wrapped package. "I made this," she said. Inside was a handmade book, each page filled with Emily's increasingly skilled drawings. It told the story of a little girl, a brave dog, and the family they found. Not a family of birth, but one created through kindness and courage. The final page showed a house with Margaret, Emily, and Sampson in the garden. Above them, like benevolent spirits, floated Mildred and a healthy, smiling Heather. Beneath the drawing, in careful letters, "My family." The last guest to arrive came with a nurse escort, Heather Carter, now 8 months into her treatment. Her face had filled out, her eyes were clear, and though she moved with the careful steps of someone still finding her balance, the improvement was remarkable. The reunion between mother and daughter was gentle. They didn't rush into embrace, but sat together on the garden bench, Heather admiring Emily's schoolwork, Emily showing her mother the room Margaret had helped her decorate. "You look happy," Heather said, wonder and a touch of sadness in her voice. "I am," Emily confirmed, then added with wisdom beyond her years, "And you look better." "I'm trying," Heather smiled softly. "Just like you." As the gathering wound down, Mason found himself standing with Margaret, watching Emily show Heather and Sampson her vegetable garden. "Never thought my last case would end like this," he admitted. "End?" Margaret raised an eyebrow. "This isn't an ending, Richard. It's a beginning." Later, as twilight painted the sky in lavender and gold, Emily climbed onto Margaret's lap on the porch swing. Sampson settled at their feet, ever vigilant but more relaxed these days. Heather had returned to her treatment facility, but with plans for longer visits soon. "Margaret?" Emily asked, her voice sleepy. "Yes, sunshine. What's the most important word in the world?" Margaret considered. "Love? Kindness? What do you think it is?" Emily thought for a moment, watching fireflies begin to dance across the yard. Finally, she smiled and whispered her answer: "Home." In that simple word lay everything: safety, belonging, hope, and the promise that even after the darkest confinement, there could be light. Not just a building with walls, but a place where hearts found each other and healing began. As stars appeared overhead, Emily drifted to sleep in the security of Margaret's arms, Samson keeping watch below. A family created not by blood, but by the extraordinary journey they had taken together. Not an ending at all, but a beginning.